this last video for the chapter on production and costs, I just want to very quickly touch on the relationship between short run and long run average cost curves. So now remember, the difference between short run versus the long run is that in the short run, you've got at least one factor of production, at least one input that's fixed, right? You can't change the quantity, decrease or increase it. In the long run, all factors are variable, right? So in the long run, there is no variable versus fixed cost. It's just cost, total cost, average cost, marginal cost. But what does the long run average cost curve look like, and how does it relate to the short run cost curves? Okay. And so on the x-axis, we have the quantity that's being produced, and then we've got the cost, right, in dollars, up on the y-axis. And as we've already shown, so you've got an average cost for, in the short run, for every level of the fixed factor. So if we're sticking with our example of the pizza restaurant, you can imagine then that we have an average cost associated with having one pizza oven. So I'll call that average cost 1. And then you're going to have an average cost curve associated with having the 2 pizza ovens like we had in our example. And then again, you'll have one for 3 pizza ovens, okay, and then for 4 pizza ovens, and we'll go ahead and do this all the way up to 5 pizza ovens. Now, some things I want you to pay attention to here, right? Really note these things. The average cost, right? So for average cost 1, that refers to the smallest, we call it a plant size, or right? So the smallest size of the what in the short run is the fixed factor, the number of pizza ovens. So this is kind of our smallest scale here, right? This is the quantity. Label that Q1, that's where that short run average cost curve hits its minimum. Here is right, if we had the 2 pizza ovens, that's the quantity where we achieve the lowest average cost with 2 pizza ovens. The other thing I want you to, and again, you can do this, say, just go ahead and show this out to 3 pizza ovens. You get the point. We don't have to do this all the way out to 5 of them. But there's one thing I want you to note. So in the long run, if you wanted to make, say, the quantity Q2, right, there's a question of, well, what is the optimal number of pizzas to use, or pizza ovens to use? Well, now here you can compare this to all the other, right, all the other quantities here. Don't draw things terribly well to scale, but if you compare then the average cost down here to every other, right, so compare it to, say, 3 ovens and 1 oven, right? So here is the average cost for 2 pizza ovens at that quantity. Well, if you only had 1 pizza oven, you'd be producing that number of pizzas at much higher cost than you would with 2 ovens. So you might say, well, why not get an extra oven? Well, in this case, right, here's the average cost curve for 3 pizza ovens. Right? The average cost of making this quantity of pizzas is actually higher with 3 ovens. Well, why would that be the case? Or what would be going on there? Well, it's the case that you'd have the wrong scale, right? Having 3 pizza ovens gets your costs down if you're making a good number of pizzas, but if you're making relatively few pizzas, then really what you do is you have this really high fixed cost, right, associated with those 3 ovens in the short run, right? Remember, fixed cost is a short run notion. But you're not making enough pizzas to really justify the fixed cost of that 3rd oven. So you'd be better off making Q2 with 2 pizza ovens. Okay? And so that's how we start to get this notion then in the long run, right, depending on what quantity we want to make, that determines what the combination ultimately of pizza ovens and workers that we'll want to use. So when we're looking at the long run average cost curve, we often use the term lower envelope. Really what we're saying is then, if you trace this out, the long run average cost curve traces out all of the short run average cost curves running through their low points, right? Running through their minimums. And I drew them a little bit off in some cases here, but right? So it's running through the minimum points of all of those other average cost curves. Okay? And so that's the way we see this relationship between long run average cost and these short run average cost curves. Okay? The long run average cost curve is tracing out the envelope, as we say, the lower envelope of all these short run average cost curves. The key insight that you always want to hold on to here is that there is an optimal level of capital, in this case the number of pizza ovens, depending on the scale of your operation. Right? If you're going to make relatively few pizzas per week, you don't want to have 3, 4, or 5 pizza ovens. Likewise, if you're going to be making a lot of pizzas, you're not going to try to do that with only one pizza oven because your cost is going to be way too high. Of course, realistically, you may not even be able to produce that quantity of pizzas in a week with only one oven anyway. Okay? And so that's the relationship between long run average cost and short run average cost. And so we're able to, in this chapter, then put everything together and think about our cost curves, how costs relate to the production side of things, right, to total product, marginal product, how those affect our average costs in the short run and then in the long run. And in subsequent chapters, we're going to use everything we developed here about our cost curves to help us to examine different kinds of industry structures, starting with competitive markets and then moving on to monopolies.